Just because something is true does not necessarily mean it is the accurate interpretation of a Bible passage. Hey everyone, I'm Colin, the resident nerd and Bible scholar here at the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered. And this week we are going to what is arguably the most famous verse in the entirety of the Bible. That's right, John 3:16. Say it with me. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. I want to bring up this verse today because of a sermon I heard a few years back. In that sermon, I learned a very important point that the preacher was not trying to make. And it's that just because something is right or sounds good or Bible-y does not necessarily mean that that is the correct thing to say in this particular passage. Here's what happened. The preacher was going on how much God loves you. And he made a point that if you look at this verse, it doesn't just say that God loved the world, it says that he so loved the world. So it means that he really loved the world, like he really, really loves you. Now, that sounds good, and I would even agree with the fact that God doesn't just love you, he really loves you. However, that's not what the verse means. See, this comes from confusion of what the word so now means in English. It can be a conjunction. If I said I was out of milk, so I went to the store, that's a conjunction. It can be an adverb, like that preacher tried to say. But in modern English, we turn it more into an adjective. Like I wouldn't say I love my wife. I wouldn't say I so love my wife. I would say I love my wife so much, where it is now modifying much. But it's the same idea. However, there is another older way in which so can be an adverb. And it's when it means something along the lines of thus or in this way. And that's actually the meaning of this particular Greek word. So when the King James translated it as so 400 years ago, it was an accurate representation of the adverbial form where it means in this way or thus. But we've kind of lost that meaning in modern English, or at least we rarely ever use it anymore. So it doesn't come into anyone's mind when they read this verse. But what the verse really means is, for God loved the world thusly. How? That he gave his only begotten Son. Or you could say, for God loved the world in this manner. And the implied is, well, in which manner? That he gave his only begotten Son. And it really surprised me to find that there are even some Bible versions that make this mistake, where they go the same route that that preacher did. If you look up like the Good News Bible or the New Century Version, they say, for God so much loved the world, or God loved the world so much. But there are also a couple of versions that get it right, where they say God loved the world in this way. The Net Bible is one of them, for this is the way God loved us. I think the Christian Standard Bible is another one that got it right that way. So this verse does not actually say, for God really loved the world. It's saying, for God loved the world in this way, that he gave his only Son. Now, does that mean that God doesn't really, really love the world? No, of course not. God does really love us. But that's not what this particular verse says. And if you want to make that point, that's fine, but don't try to say that's what John 3:16 means, when that's not what John 3:16 means. This is a great example of how we have to be careful not to repeat something just because it sounds churchy or biblical. And even in a case where it is technically right, we have to be careful not to present a text as meaning something other than what it's actually trying to say. And I will admit, this is a tough one. Even if you read multiple Bible versions in English and maybe even some commentaries, it is possible you could be given the wrong idea on this verse. But the good news is there are a ton of reputable scholars out there who know Greek and Hebrew, so you don't have to, and they explain this kind of thing. There are better commentaries out there. And now there are resources like Logos and Blue Letter Bible, where you can just right-click on a word and you can see what the meaning was in the original languages without actually having to know those original languages. You know, Bible study is hard, and it's a lot easier just to say something that sounds churchy. But if we want to be faithful to the text and present our faith honestly, we need to put in the work to make sure that what we're saying is what the verse means.